All right, well, good evening, everybody. My name is Rob Tebow, Director of the Hunt College Union, and I want to welcome everyone to 3 Things I Learned About Risk-Taking. This is the 18th episode of 3 Things, and the whole point of this program is to gather employees, alumni, and students to get together and have conversations about important things, fun things, deep things. Regardless, it's about having conversations. It's not about who you are, what degree you have, or what standpoint of life you come from. We're all people with knowledge, skills, and interesting experiences, and people got something to share. So this is what we do tonight. We're going to take on risk-taking. We've got some guests and panelists here with us. We've got people in the studio audience. Good. And so we're going to have a conversation tonight about taking risks. We're going to ask some questions of our panelists in a few minutes, and then we're going to reach out to the audience to get questions from them to ask to our panelists up here. We're going to have a conversation tonight, and it's going to be a lot of fun, I think. So let's ready to go deep. You ready to go deep? Mm-hmm. I'd like to introduce my co-host, Dr. Monica Grau.
Thanks, Rob. Our guest tonight I'm really excited about. We have Dr. Sally Hahn, who's from our anthropology department. She's been here since 2006. She received her BA in English from Williams College and was not accepted to any of the graduate programs in English to which she applied. She worked as a newspaper reporter for almost 5 years at the Daily News in New York, then went on to earn her PhD in anthropology from the University of Michigan. She received the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Anne Marie Hausmesser, who serves as the Vice President for Institutional Advancement at Nardin Academy in Buffalo. She's served as the Associate Vice President for Philanthropy and Engagement at D'Youville College and also as the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at the University of Rochester. Anne Marie earned her BS in Secondary Education, Family and Consumer Sciences from SUNY Oneonta and an MS and EDD in Educational Leadership from the University of Rochester, where her research focused on leadership and management, organizational development, and the engagement of non-traditional alumni populations. She is an adjunct faculty member in the Higher Education Administration Department at SUNY Buffalo State, a board member and 2021 conference co-chair for the WNY Association of Fundraising Professionals, and treasurer of the SUNY Oneonta Alumni Association, and as a student was involved in Inter-Greek Council, Omicron Delta Kappa, OFAN lead, and was treasurer of the class of 2012. I'd like to welcome both our panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hahn.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me here. I think it was when I was asked to come and talk about taking risks, I'm like, who, me? So I'll do my best to talk about what I've learned about taking risks, probably from taking risks. And let me just say I'm probably not, I don't really, I was thinking about like, well, what are these risk-taking stories? Can I tell you about throwing myself off a boulder or something? And I don't have those kinds of stories. But I do have a story about, I think probably one of the biggest risks I ever took in my life was I quit a job. And I quit a job without having another job lined up. And the job I quit was actually one that you mentioned. I was at the New York Daily News for 5 years. I had been promoted from editorial assistant to a staff writer, which was almost unheard of. And so after a few years, I felt like I'd learned what I needed to learn, and I was done. So it was scary because I was like, I know I'm gonna quit my job and write books. So which sounds kind of not well thought out or planned. And so that was the biggest risk I think I've ever taken in my life. And I thought through, well, what does it mean to take a risk? Why did it feel so risky? So, and I made a little list. So I was thinking that there was always the fear of failure and the fear of harm. And I think those are the things that maybe stop us from doing things, taking a chance. And that's what we mean by risk is that the alternative to what we want to have happen is failing or doing harm to ourselves or someone else, right? So with leaving my job without another job and with just the hope, I guess there was the risk of financial ruin. There's that. It was New York City, right? There was also a bit of a reputational risk because I had worked very hard to get to that position, and I was just going to walk away from it. And so I know that there were people who were a little bit upset with me. So I might lose their support as well. So that was a relational risk, right? And by then I had a partner, a spouse, and it was going to be a big hit on our household for me to leave my job, right? And then also a risk to my identity, right? Because I did work hard to get to that place, and I took a lot of pride in what I was doing. So leaving that behind and becoming what? I don't know. That was a huge problem there. So I think that's the biggest risk. Should I keep going now? Yeah. So, so that's the risk I took. And what I learned from that, and why I think I now look back at that time, and I feel like, nah, I've done lots of things where I've taken sort of chances and tried things with uncertainty. But I feel like I haven't taken a lot of risks because I don't feel like I risk things the same way. And so the three things have to do with why sometimes taking risks doesn't even feel like taking a risk. Like what makes it less risky and therefore more possible, and how you end up doing even more things, right? So one, it doesn't matter if it's big or small. Taking a chance, risking that uncertainty, whew, that's going to feel hard. It doesn't matter if it's a big thing or a small thing. It doesn't matter if it's like a new flavor of ice cream at Ben & Jerry's that I'd never heard of, and I'm like, what if I don't like that? So it can be hard. It can be. It's not the instinctual thing to do necessarily. So I always feel like it's really important to give yourself a break and be kind, and it's okay if you acknowledge that it's hard, right? So the second thing I'm going to say is it's also so okay not to take a risk, right? So I'm going to say that there's merit to taking your time, and there's also merit. Okay, there's a place for cowardice, right? I'm a total coward about many things. And we don't always have to celebrate risk-taking all the time. So again, if it's not right now, be kind to yourself, because maybe the time comes up later. And I know that's probably the totally wrong, unpopular, like you're going to come at me on that one about like maybe risk-taking isn't always the thing, right? But I'll also say this. Number 3, it isn't necessarily a risk at all if you are being kind, when you are being kind to yourself and supportive, and when other people also have your back, right? And so when that is all true, when you're taking your time and you feel supported, then this thing that seems kind of scary and maybe a little bit, whoa, why would you do that? Why would you quit your job that's paying pretty well when you've just bought an apartment and all of that, when you've worked so hard to get that? Why would you leave that behind? Well, because other people had my back. And so I think that it was hard for me to think about when have been the risks in my life, because I feel like I've always had someone's support. And so all the things that I've tried to do, there was never the fear of failing. It didn't matter, because a mistake is a mistake and you're going to get over it. And the fear of harming myself or someone else, no, because people already told me I wasn't doing that to them or to myself. So I feel that actually the conclusion is I feel like I've had a relatively risk-free life, because everything I've done, I've always felt like there was a backup and support and kindness and generosity. And so it never, okay, so the Ben & Jerry's thing doesn't really fit that story so well, but whatever. But I think I think maybe like the fourth thing, even though we're talking about three, about risk taking is it really does make you value how much support and kindness is really important in your life. And that's, it's not the thing that stops you from doing things, it's the things that let you be able to go on and try all that other stuff. So you're not going to disappoint other people. They have your back. So that's what I've learned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, well, I was going to ask for Anne Marie, but I guess I'd like to comment on one thing. For some of us, we're all a little different, our personalities. I'm actually an introvert, and for me to do these kinds of things or talk to people in public, it's pretty damn scary. And so I have to compensate by being a little over the top. So for me, as for other introverts, it can be very difficult and be a risk to stand in front of people and talk to them. And for me, you have to, I guess for me, I elevate with a strategy of just going over the top. So I always find that fascinating because I fake it. Like I'm good at this, but I'm not. I'm scared right now. Really am, because I'm in front of Anne Marie. Anne Marie, what say you? What are 3 things you've learned about taking risks or from taking risks?
I love this. This is great. So I actually to your point, I've heard myself say, well, I'm risk averse. I'm a risk averse person, and I think what I mean is that I don't like to take risks that other people have set up for me. This may sound like a silly example, but when my brother and I were younger, my grandparents, would take us to dinner at one of the casinos in the area, and my grandma would say, "Okay, here's $10 for each of you, and you can go put a penny in the machine and play a penny." And I would put the $10 in my wallet and say, "Well, I'm going to put it toward a new pair of shoes because I love shoes." And to them they were like, "Well, the fun is in the game. The fun is in the risk, in the challenge, And I was like, "I'm uninterested, And so I'm gonna pocket my money. So I've always felt like, well, I'm just a risk averse person. I have no interest in stuff like that. But then thinking about what I was going to say tonight, I was like, wow, I guess I have taken some risks that, as you mentioned earlier, maybe didn't seem monumental. But the first one I wanted to talk about that came to mind is when you take, for me, when I've taken a risk, I'm proud of myself no matter the outcome. So I'm proud that I've taken that risk. And the first story, again, kind of silly, that came to mind is when I was in my early teenage years, there was a boy in my middle school who I wanted to go to the 8th grade dance with. And I was very uncool. And he was very cool. And I decided, I worked up the courage that I was going to call him on our landline phone and ask him to the 8th grade dance. And I was like, I had talked myself into this, and I was going to do it one day after school before my parents got home so that I wouldn't be embarrassed. And do you know what he said? He said, I have to ask my mom, which in 12-year-old language, 13-year-old language means no. So needless to say, I did not go to the 8th grade dance with this young gentleman. And when my mom came home and I kind of eventually told her what happened. And she said, well, I'm proud of you because you at least called him and you were, now you know. And it did not take me long. I got to the dance, and my 13-year-old brain remembered this. I got to the dance, and I was with my friends. I went with my friends instead. And I remember telling my friends, I asked Spencer, and he said no. But you know what? I'm proud of myself because I'm having more fun with you anyway. And they were like, you did? And I was so proud of myself. I was so proud of telling them because they were like, oh, we didn't ask anybody. We just assumed we were going to go together. And I was just proud of myself, even though he said no. My 13-year-old brain was like, well, now I know that he's not worth my time, So, lesson number one, I was proud of myself no matter what. And really who you go to the 8th grade dance with does not matter in the grand scheme of life. But at the time, I felt like it did. The next thing I wanted to share is from taking risks that personally I've learned that I am stronger emotionally and physically than I knew I was. And I think anyone, until you put yourself in an uncomfortable situation and you take a risk, you don't know how strong, how smart, how fast, how, capable you are. One of the things, I was never athletic growing up. I did not, I was a ballet dancer. But when it came to organized sports or anything that involved a whole lot of muscle and strength, it was not my thing. So I took a risk. And again, these may seem like silly examples, but for me, I know I now have found a kind of fitness community here in Buffalo that is full of people who were not athletes and are not, any organized sport, really, those are not our forte. But I feel physically, mentally, and emotionally stronger because I went to one class at this gym and went up to the instructor and said, what's the lightest pair of weights that you have in this gym? Literally, I got to start from the bottom. And now I found this community that I otherwise would have talked myself out of. I'm not a gym person. I'm not a fitness person. I'm not an athletic person, So you are stronger, smarter, faster, more capable than you think. You just have to you just have to try. And the third thing I wanted to share is a little more recent in what I've learned. I'm a big Brene Brown fan. I read a lot of Brene Brown's work on vulnerability and shame resistance and all that. And I've learned professionally, not always, but usually, people appreciate vulnerability more than you realize. Mm-hmm. And my example for this is most recently the job I'm in now, the position I'm in now, I've only been there just over a month. And when I applied, I had searched on the website and found the name of their the Board of Trustees chair, and I sent her a LinkedIn message. And I wanted this job so badly, that I said, I could be way out of line here. I could be stepping way out of boundaries, but I want you to know who I am so that when my resume comes across your desk, you know that I at least tried, that little extra. And she said to me, that kind of vulnerability, that kind of courage is what we need here. And I do believe that there are other people in that pile of resumes who on paper were more qualified than I was. But I took a risk. I was terrified to hit send. I was like, and honestly, what's the worst that could happen? They ignore your LinkedIn message. That's right. But I've learned, I think when you get to a professional place in a certain level of maturity, other professionals will appreciate vulnerability more than you realize. And you don't have to have all the answers, and you don't need to be the best resume. You need to have heart, and put yourself out there. So for me, it's be proud of yourself, even if the boy doesn't want to go to the 8th grade dance with you. Go to the gym, even if you're not an athletic person, and send the LinkedIn message. And you will get the job. So those are my risks. Again, just like you, I am not jumping off mountains. I'm not jumping out of airplanes, those kinds of risks. But when I sat down and thought about it, those are the stories that came to mind. Thank you,
Anne-Marie.
Absolutely.
I remember doing my first jumping out of the airplane thing, by the way. And the key was, and I've embodied this in part of my life too, is as everyone was sitting in this little biplane getting ready to do the jump, and the jump master would tell you to go, there were a lot of folks that were like, oh, I'm not doing it, and I kept telling myself, don't think, just do. Don't think, just do. And when it was my time, I kind of got up, went through the motions, stepped down on the step, put my hand up on the other bar, and I'm floating. And what I told myself was, I'm going to do it with gusto. And so when he said go, instead of just letting go, because my feet were dangling behind me, instead of letting just go like I should have, I pushed myself and I pressed myself and did a backflip. And it was the scariest thing ever. But the point was, it was don't think, just do. So sometimes for me in life, taking risks, if I think about it too much, I'm going to miss an opportunity. If I want to do something, like you said on the LinkedIn, don't think about it much, just do it. That
do
stuck
it.
with me. All right,
Just do
I'm
it.
sorry, thank you.
I love it.
Dr. Grau, what do you got? What questions do we have for our panelists here tonight?
I think one of the things that struck me is you both touched on that feeling of proud, mom being proud of you. You talked about support. How do we ask, if we're going to take a risk, something that we think is risky, whatever our definition of risk is, I'm going to send a LinkedIn message. How do we take the risk of asking for support? How do you ask for support so that you know you have people behind you? How do we do that? Do you have suggestions for our audience members on how to do that, how to ask for support? Either.
Well, I can start, because Anne-Marie, when you were speaking about Brene Brown and talking about vulnerability, that's exactly the idea that came to mind is sometimes just asking for help feels like a risk, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Right, and so I think that's I mean, that's really deep, right? But I think this is where your trust in your people, right? The people who you count on, there's a reason why they're your people, right? So hopefully, I've never felt like I had to have like this, like, well, we're going to sit down and we're going to have this, like, it's usually like they know I'm going through stuff because they're so in touch with me, and I think that's why, going back to the point, like I in some ways feel like I haven't ever really taken a risk, not because I haven't taken chances, but because that support has always been there when I needed it. So the other side of that is I hope I'm there for other people for the same reason, right? So I hope I put out there exactly what I'm getting back. Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of the question of vulnerability and asking for help taking that risk, it's actually not like asking the boy to the 8th grade dance. And I probably have a story like that too, but 8th grade was like a longer time ago for me. Yeah, no, I think I recognize that can be the tough part, and hopefully you have those relationships where you feel like I almost didn't even need to ask. They already knew, right?
Yeah.
Right. I think when those around you know how much something means to you in that moment, this is not, I'm asking for your help because I have this fleeting idea or decision. This is something that really means a lot to me, and you should know me well enough to know that, and that's why I'm coming to you. And I think it's a maturity thing too. It comes with time.
Thank you both. I have a question before we reach out to our audience members. You know, in the spirit of don't think, just do. How much thought do you both put into risk taking, and maybe what strategies or calculus do you keep in mind when you're trying to make decisions to step over a threshold of decision making that leads or can be risky? So what do you keep in mind? What do you weigh, and how do you go about making that decision before you jump in and just say don't think, just do? Don't do what I do. We want to know what you do.
I think I'm a heart over head kind of person, honestly, which I can't believe I'm saying this because I usually describe myself as pretty type A and organized and whatever, but I do think I prioritize my own fulfillment. I've learned to be pretty good at filling my own cup first, you know, and that allows me to take a risk with my heart and maybe not super prepare for it ahead of time. But I don't know, honestly, I don't think during my time at Oneonta as a student, I probably would have answered that way. I think it took me a while to know myself better and know what I needed to do to, you know, like I said, to fill my cup first so that I could take a risk and not feel like it was going to crumble my whole emotional being. You know, so maybe in certain situations, I think I'm probably a little more calculated, but I maybe am more of a head over heart person when it comes to planning to take a risk.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I would probably answer similarly to Anne-Marie in that, like, I think I go through a long period of, like, I ruminate, I think through, I rationalize, I reason, right? But then at the final moment, you just gotta, you do it or you don't, right? And at that moment, perhaps I've mentally psyched myself up. Maybe all that preparation is not really a rational preparation. It's a kind of psyching yourself into, like, finally making the leap.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to imagine, like, hanging on these bars with my feet flying out, like, and I think it's that whole fine, you know, like, so you're that final moment when you let go. That's just it, right? But maybe it took me a while to get to that place, to even step my feet out of the plane.
Right.
But once you're there, and you just do it. Yeah.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Anne-Marie. I'm going to reach out to the audience member and touch someone. And who would like to go first out there?
I'll go first.
And what is your name?
Danielle Shaw.
Okay.
So I'm definitely someone who takes a lot of risks. I enjoy them, and I think that some of the best experiences in my life have come from a time that I took a risk. So my question is, how do you convince the other people in your life to take some of those risks, maybe with you, or just to get the most out of their lives as well?
Interesting. That's a great question. I love that. So you want to bring people along with you. You know, and I feel like you're the friend. You're the like everyone is lucky to have the friend like you, because because I am one of those people who are like, well, I'm really careful, and then finally I'll let go. But sometimes I need I need someone to instigate, right? I need someone to come up with the inspiration, because I'm not necessarily going to go and seek that myself. And boy, am I glad to have those friends, like those people in my life who are like, so I think you model it. You model the joy, you model the happiness, you model the reward. Like, that's how you convince people, is like, you just show it. You just show up exactly as you are, like, this is how great this is. And I feel like those are some of my happiest friends. Like, those are the friends I'm also, not just the happiest people, but also like the friends of mine who make me happy. They also understand, for me, the risk, my discomforts. Like, they're often also the most supportive about my risk taking, because they understand and they can see the happy side of it and not just the unhappy, like the potential fearful unhappy side. They can see right through that to this other bright lining. So I think you just do what you do, and you just say, come along for the ride. It'll be great. We'll be together, right?
Thank you.
Right. That is tough. I definitely, you know, peer pressure in a way doesn't go away at any time in life. You never kind of grow out of it. But I think for that communication between friends or family, whoever it is, to know that I would never do anything to harm you. I would never put you in an unsafe situation. You know, I would never encourage you to do something where the risk is higher than the reward. You know, I can proof is in the pudding, right? Like, I can prove to you that this is going to add to your life. It's a trust factor. For a lot of times, you know, for my time in Oneonta, it was joining clubs, applying to be an orientation leader, that kind of stuff. Someone can show me that this is an additive to your life. This is a value add thing for you, and it's not an unsafe situation. That's, I think, the difference between encouraging people to take risks and actually pressuring them into you know, things that they shouldn't be doing. But it's definitely, it's you have to have a trusting relationship. It's definitely built on trust.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm going to have Danielle step in and take the seat here. That was well done. Well done, sister. You have a question yourself before we jump back out?
We can go back out into
Let's
the
go back
audience.
to the audience. Who's next?
Yeah,
And what's your name, my friend?
Lizzy.
Lizzy. Hello, Lizzy.
Hi. So say you're about to take a risk that's been sitting on your mind for a while, and there's just that one thing you don't want to happen is just on your mind. Do I do it or not? So you take the risk, and that one thing you didn't want to happen happens. What do you do to, like, help yourself bounce back? into the mindset you were, like, that could be a really big setback. So what are some ways, like, to help bounce back?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think maybe look at it not so the problem is because I took the risk. What leading up to that decision could have been different, or could it, like, you know, did I ask the wrong question? Is it just the wrong time? Was it the wrong setting? Don't penalize yourself for taking the risk in general. If anything, assess the situation in which the risk was taken. You know, did you get a tattoo and now you regret it? Okay. Well, did you, you know, don't penalize yourself because you got a tattoo if that's something that you really wanted. Was it a bad tattoo parlor? Was it the wrong tattoo because you're really not going to love this person forever? You know, like that, like decouple that decision there. I don't know why tattoos come to mind, but I don't even have any. See, riskaverse. Don't have any tattoos.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a great, yeah, when the thing that you're most afraid of happens, I really like Anne-Marie's response about, like, maybe it wasn't actually the risk, right? So I tend to think it was like, was there a mistake that happened that can be corrected? And there was no mistake in taking the risk. There are other things that happen that are out of your control. So hopefully it doesn't make us more risk shy, right? Because that would be the temptation. When you find yourself in a circumstance like, wow, this is not where I wanted to be, right? Whether it's a bad tattoo or whatever it is, right? But I also think that, like, hey, your skills, your values, all those things that enabled you to be able to take a chance in the first place, they're the things that actually, like, will pull you out of it too. Like, I sincerely think that it's just that in that moment where you end up in the place you didn't want to be, I think it's okay to acknowledge that, boy, this really sucks. This is not where I wanted to be. It's okay to admit that. Right? And it's okay to, I think you're allowed to have a moment saying, like, I feel bad for myself. And then, and then you're like, and, wow, my talent, my ability, my resources got me to this place that I didn't want to be, ironically enough. And they will also help me pull out of it, including having really good friends who, like, look at this and they're like, oof, okay, we're here for you, right? But I think, I do think that whole idea of not beating yourself up or blaming yourself or blaming the idea of risk is really important, because that would be very tempting. Yeah.
Well, I love that point. I think give yourself some grace. Like, my goodness, we all need to give ourselves and each other some grace. And if you need to cry and eat a tub of chocolate ice cream and watch bad rom-com movies for a weekend, then by Lord, let yourself do it. You know, if that was, and hopefully, you know, most of the risks that we take that don't end well don't end up in that. But we are human. Like, it is okay to try and fail. Yeah. We need to normalize that. Yeah. Any more ice cream.
Right on.
I love the theme of ice cream running through this.
Yeah.
Tonight.
We should have some now. Actually, if I could just add real quickly before we move on, like, I think, like, when we do things like, you know, spend the weekend binging on Ben and Jerry's watching Netflix or something, I actually think that's kind of grieving, right? It's a kind of, like, we talk about failure as if there's something really wrong, right? Like, there's, like, you're not allowed to. But, like, think about the things, like, you're allowed to mourn and grieve something that you wish had happened, right? Or some future, or some circumstance that has changed, and now it's something that you didn't want it to be. I feel like, especially now after the year and a half or whatever that we've gone through, I hope that we do allow ourselves to recognize, like, that it's important to grieve, and then you can move on. And so risk does come with a certain amount of possibility of grief, right? So failure, being afraid to fail, I feel like that's a form of grief, right? And that if you allow yourself that moment to grieve, then you really can restore yourself and move along. So chocolate ice cream is a great idea.
Oh yeah, always.
Anne Marie, if you come back in town, you got to go to Adeline's Ice Cream Shop on Main Street. Just letting you know. That's a shout out to Adeline's, free advertising. Check out Adeline's on Main Street.
And I wish we could say we got some kind of reward
We
for
get nothing.
doing product placement, but we don't.
We got nothing. What you got, sister?
So
Noted.
I've become Instagram, TikTok, I don't want to say addict because it's not that bad, but I enjoy doing a little scrolling in the evening while Bill is watching the Yankee game. And I see a lot of what I would consider risky behavior. So I'm wondering what, from the Tide Pod Challenge, and that was a couple years ago, pre-TikTok, to the Cinnamon Challenge, to this Milk Crate Challenge that's happening now. How do you think pop culture, social media influences our willingness, I don't know if it's willingness to take risks or our perception of risk, or, I want to be TikTok famous, so I'm gonna do the Milk Crate Challenge, and I don't even understand that one, but what do you think about that?
I don't even know what the Milk Crate Challenge is. Maybe Anne-Marie
It's
can tell me that.
unsafe.
It's
I don't fully understand it either. All I know is it looks very unsafe.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm looking to my experts out in the audience. You stack milk crates up and you try to jump on top of them and you try to get milk crates, milk, unsturdy plastic things, and you're trying to jump your body weight on top of them, correct?
You want to go across without falling. You stand on them and you stack them.
I'm telling you,
They have them so it's like 1 and then 2 and then 3, so it's like steps. And then you want to try and get to the top without it crashing, and then you try and go back down.
Crazy
Not that I've
stuff.
ever done that. Some of the videos
That
are funny.
sounds.
And they are funny. When people fall down, it's funny, but what does that do to our perception of risk and being famous, I guess? I'm not.
Yeah. It's it like desensitizes us, I think, to normal life, that every day does not need to be, or every second doesn't need to be this challenge that I overcame or this thing that I did that I need to show off to the world. Like, I saw a magazine actually cover the other day, just walking through the grocery store, glanced at it quickly, and the front of the cover said, "Make them obsessed with you." And I was thinking to myself, is humility alive anymore? Like, why do people need to be obsessed with me or obsessed with anyone? And I think that is, to your point, Monica, like, we need to, social media has created this mindset, and like you, I love it, and I love it for a lot of the reasons, like my family's across the country. I get to see my nephews who don't live in the same area. There are good things about it. I absolutely do believe, but also it's created this desensitized mind of not everything is a challenge or a show or a entertainment piece. Like, we don't show the things on social media that are normal. Like, I don't need to, brushing my teeth challenge to show you, something about that part of my routine. I think it leads a lot to the, self-esteem issues and just feeling like you're not good enough because you're not challenging something or risking something. And I think, to our discussion earlier, it further separates those who may be on the verge of wanting to risk something safely and feeling like, never mind, never mind, I'm not even going to try, because social media tells me that it needs to be glamorized. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, as a parent, I think the brush the teeth challenge would be excellent. Nothing wrong with that challenge.
Yeah, I'm sure many people would agree with you. Yep.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think my hygienist would really like us to take up a flossing challenge, right? That would be, challenge maybe that's the way they should go viral with like promoting, right, these kinds of things. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But I agree. I think maybe there's a way in which, it's not that social media necessarily created these, right? They what they do is they like sort of amplify these kinds of tendencies that probably existed, and they not only amplify, but they turn them into platforms of like content creation and so they've actually made something new out of it. But the impulse itself is maybe, or the pressure is not. But there is that I agree that there's been this kind of interesting, and that's why I was saying it's okay also not to take a risk, but maybe the risk that you take is not taking the risk, right? Which is like
Right.
that we don't need to necessarily valorize everything as risk-taking and challenging in this heroic kind of effort. Like maybe some of it is just dumb, and maybe some of it is just not like for what purpose? Like, is it? I think risk-taking. I guess we didn't really talk as much about like when it's very meaningful, and that's why the stakes seem so high. And that's why the fear of failure and ending up in a place you don't want to be is so hurtful, right? Because there's a personal stake in it, and there's also personal transformation that is the reward, but also maybe the thing that you grieve if it doesn't turn out the way you want. Whereas something like the cinnamon challenge, which again, so I don't know this milk crate thing, but these other things I've heard of because they're older. So I was paying attention a couple years ago or something. And I didn't really understand how they're not risk in the personal fulfillment or, right? They're more like these
Right.
they're like, there was like the late night talk show of the 80s, David Letterman, right? Well, I don't know, I have no idea if anybody even remembers who he is, but we do. But the whole stupid human tricks, like that's what some of these things strike me more as, is they are not really risks and not really, you call them risk, you call them challenge, but they're really just stunts. And so that is also a concern I have in terms of like, when you turn, like Anne Marie was saying, when you turn everything into a risk and you make them all seem like they're equal value, that's not right. Like, because people take really genuine risks that are really hard, and that's not the same as dumping ice water on your head. I mean, it really isn't.
I don't know, and I won't ask any of you to raise your hands, but I think about our new students, because that's what I tend to focus on, and some of the risks that they take, and I'm talking about going into class and raising your hand to talk to a professor because you're brand spanking new. You don't know what the rules are in the classroom. You've been online for a year and a half, and how do we encourage that risk, and I'm going to use it in quotes because to us, it's probably not a risk to raise our hand in class. I mean, you all have experience, so I feel like maybe in some classes it is. I'm not gonna make eye contact. But how do we encourage so that those things that we know are really not risky because a faculty member really wants to talk to you, or Rob, going up to Rob and saying, I really want to be the next SA president. How do I do that? So, I kind of think about the small risks that
Don't think, just do would be the advice.
Well, yes.
And I think when it's recognized, like thankfully had professors and such in my time in Oneonta, and who would stop you and say, thanks for participating today, or that's a really good, even the instant like, that's a really good question, I'm really glad you asked that question, and then it subconsciously we don't think about it, right, as a big risk, but people around you are thinking, oh, all right, well, okay, I guess it's cool to ask a question in this class or whatever, but that makes a difference when it is recognized, acknowledged, for sure.
Fair.
Hey, I think we have time for one final audience question before we do a little wrap up in the speed round. So I'm going to reach out and touch, what's your name, my friend?
I'm Olivia.
Olivia, what do you got for our panelists tonight?
So I feel like when we talk about risks, we talk about the ones that we've taken in which we've been, positively impacted, or the ones in which we're glad we took. But have you ever taken a risk that you've regretted? And why have you regretted it? And how has that potentially impacted or shaped your experience of future risks that you've taken?
That's a good one.
That's a really good one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. I mean, hindsight is 20/20 for me. I definitely think about risky behavior maybe that I participated in, or when you're younger and then you realize now, like, holy moly, that could have gone really badly, and you don't realize it in the time. But then you're just thankful, that it didn't. I'm trying to think of something immediate that I regret. Let me keep thinking.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So, hey, look, I was a child in the 70s and a teen in the 80s, so like many bad choices. And here I am. So I look back and I don't know if I can say I necessarily regret, but I was doing stuff that I'm like, oh, if my own kids were doing some of these things, I would say, whoa, you took a real chance there. And wow, aren't we lucky that that somehow we ended up on the other side, and and now decades later, here I am, right? So, yeah, I think there's something about some of those risks, maybe they're not the positive, oh, and I learned so much, but they're the other ones where you're like, huh, all right, I'm not going to do that again. And so I look at some of those things, I'm like, I'm lucky I emerged unscathed, and maybe I had an unhappy and regrettable story, but that I was able to then compartmentalize it as a story, right? It wasn't something that had to go on and affect my personal life and trajectory in that way. And so maybe risk-taking is that also, right? Is that it's these stories that we learn that we're like, okay, I don't really want to remember the particulars of that, but I know that there are certain things I should just not do, and that I would advise people I care about, or anyone, don't do that. You don't have to take that risk.
Right. I think one thing I do regret is knowing that I was privy to risky, unsafe, caveat here, unsafe, risky behavior that I've known other people are taking part in, and that I didn't speak up. So that is one thing I regret. And it's not like, there are many of friends I've had in my life that have taken positive developmental risks, and I've supported them, but I've also seen people risk getting in the car after I know that they've had one too many drinks, or stuff like that, where then you do regret. That's a risky, unsafe behavior that I know better, that as a bystander, we talk about bystander intervention, all that all the time. That's what I do regret, is when I know that there's a safety issue for others involved.
All right. Thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you, Sally. In 2 weeks, we get back together and we get into, what is it? Oh, yes, it's 3 weeks, or 3 things I learned from technology and social media. Well, Jessica Reynolds here from the college. 2 alumni, will be Alice Maggio, and then Kyle Beckley will be here in stage. So we look forward to having that challenge in itself and that conversation. This is the speed round, by the way, where I offer a question and our guests, and Monica and I, will jump in, and I think we should actually, but I would also challenge them, but they've done enough tonight. They've done enough. So to take us away, the final question of the night is, what is one of the greatest, in your opinions, one of the greatest human risks humans have taken in history? One of the greatest human risks in history. What do you got? And we'll just go around to close it out. Anyone?
Giving birth. Yeah.
Giving birth. There's one.
Yeah. Well, I have more. I'm an
Love is what
anthropologist.
comes
Yeah.
to mind.
I know. I think that instinct. I was going to say. I mean, when we talked about these questions, Rob said the moon launch.
Sure.
I'm like, oh yeah, that
Moon
was a
landing,
risk.
yeah.
But what happened before that to get us there? And every time I went back to something, so I'm going to say the urge to travel. I'm going to
Urge
be
to travel. All
like
right.
like migrate, not just travel, but migrate from your home to a whole new place.
Often thought of like,
I love that.
often think in history, I think of the risk that Jackie Robinson took to shut his mouth, to agree to not say a dang thing for 40, 60 games throughout the season after being attacked by fans. He agreed to keep his mouth closed, get through the season. I always thought that was one of the toughest things you could do, and the amount of pressure, the loathing you had to take on, but just to kind of say, I will agree not to strike back or speak back to people. That was pretty risky, I think, and opened the doors for a lot of important things in society. What you got, Anne Marie?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things now. It makes me start. But what came to my mind is allowing yourself and each other to love each other, regardless of
That's a good one.
race, gender, sexual orientation. I think it is. I think those who love openly and are open and unapologetic about who they love are incredibly brave. I think that's a huge risk.
Thank you. All right, well, on behalf of Sally and Anne Marie, Monica, and myself, I want to thank everyone for joining us here tonight in our first in-person 3 Things I Learned About Something here in the IRC studios, room 111, in case you didn't know. Thank you, everyone, for being out, and see you sometime soon. Catch you later.